I'm just waiting for Charlotte Caldwell, and I will start in a minute. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Is everyone excited? Yeah. I'm so lame, sorry about that. Luke, I need Charlotte Caldwell. Hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming. I am pleased to officially welcome you to the Brighton Medicinal Cannabis Summit 2023. Thank you. It has been a really long journey to get here and to be back and to relaunch United Patients Alliance. It has taken years' worth of hard work behind the scenes by a few key dedicated people, and I've wanted first to start the day by just really saying thanks to them. So you will see you have a QR code on your timetable. Your QR code has a little bit about, has the brochure in. And our brochure has our directors in it. So first I want to thank Layla for all of her hard work. I want to thank Kieran for all of his hard work. Matthew Ross, wherever Matthew's here, thanks Matthew. And to Jake Barrow as well, who unfortunately is too unwell and couldn't make it today. And then to all of the other members of the team that have all chipped in, done their bit to make this event happen today. So I think they all deserve a round of applause. So if you could join me. Thanks, everyone. So if you'd like to, do you want to come with me, Charlotte? So I'm very pleased to welcome Charlotte Caldwell and Billy here today. Just wanted to say a little thing about why we're here and what it is we're doing until I'm going to pass over to Charlotte, and then we're going to start our first panel. But you'll see the word cannabis around a lot, but really this is actually about patients, and this is about quality of life, and this is about something that every single human being on the planet deserves: access to quality of life and quality medicine. This is a serious issue, but it's also recreational too. And where is the line between recreational and medicinal, and what is that? Well, personally, I believe that there is no line. There is no medicinal or recreational cannabis. There is just cannabis. And for many people, that happens to be medicine. And so what we're really doing is we're on the cutting edge. We're on the front lines, changing people's hearts and minds, because there's been a war on drugs. There's no war on drugs. There's a war on us. A war on your friends, your family, everyone that you love. They want to take their freedom away. And it's infuriating to still be here. This is my 13th year campaigning, and we have come so far. We are so far from where we were, but in terms of where we need to be, we're nowhere near where we need to be yet either. So I thought it was vital to bring the UPA back, have a patient-led organisation run by patients for patients, and it's my passion. I had to take a little bit of time out whilst I had my son, and you know, it's amazing to be here. It's amazing to be back. It's amazing that all of you have come today and are part of it. And I think we just need to remember that the hard work starts when we get home. Like it's all good to come together and to talk about these things that are going on, but really we need to all work hard to change hearts and minds, to end this stigma, because there's a pervasive stigma around this plant that just makes it very difficult for medicinal cannabis patients, even those that have legal prescriptions. So, firstly, we are here to celebrate. We are celebrating that we've got legal prescriptions. We're celebrating that the venue has kindly agreed that we can vape here today. Not upstairs, only on the ground floor, but patients that have a prescription can vape inside, which is amazing. Massive thanks to the venue for that. I feel a bit awkward now. I think I'm going to pass it over to Charlotte because you've got some... we had a chat yesterday and yeah, I think I'll introduce Charlotte. So Charlotte Caldwell, you'll all know Charlotte Caldwell, but Charlotte Caldwell and Billy Caldwell is the case that changed the law in 2018, and Billy was the first NHS prescription, and that set the precedent for other people to be able to get a prescription. And so those of us that are legally vaping today, we all owe it to Charlotte's work. So I'm very I'm very humbled to say that you're here. Thank you. That's so
awesome. Good morning, everybody. I've had to make some notes. I'm going to try and keep this short and just summarise basically our journey and a few other bits. And because of the length of Billy and I's battle and our fight to get him his prescription cannabis, that's why I'm going to try and keep this as slimmed down as possible. So, but first of all, I just wanted to say I'm so proud right now to let all of you know that my gratefulness to be here today. Billy and I humbly convey our utmost thanks to Clark and the UPA team for making this happen. I am the mother of a special needs child who requires cannabis to live. I'm not a politician. I haven't got £1 million corporate company backing me, nor am I a member of the elite. I'm just an ordinary mummy who was faced with an extraordinary challenge to keep my little boy alive. A number of years ago, I was offered palliative care for my son because he was having multiple seizures. And by multiple, I mean as many as 300 seizures in one day. That was his new baseline. I was sent home from the hospital with my son in the car seat still seizing because there was no new meds to try, no new choices for his team of doctors to implement. And I couldn't stomach the thought of palliative care. So I took my little boy home to die, and while he slept, I scoured the globe to find something, anything to keep him alive. And that search led to prescription cannabis. June this year will mark 5 years since that same little boy from the foothills of Tyrone and Castledairg changed an outdated unjust law in 8 days flat. When he returned from Canada into the UK with his life-saving medicine, it was seized by tearful customs, prompting a national outcry. Within days, my beautiful boy was taken to hospital in a life-threatening condition, and thankfully the medicine was returned by the Home Office. And a first-of-its-kind decision was taken by the NHS to pay for his unlicensed medical cannabis prescription. 5 years on, here we are, and the medical establishment refused to prescribe cannabis medicine on the NHS until the efficacy has been proven in clinical trials, coupled with the medical manufacturers resisting to invest in trials. This has forced vulnerable, chronically ill patients who benefit from unlicensed medicines, such as Billy's, to turn to costly private prescriptions. To me, this is beyond cruel. With soaring bills and a cost of living crisis, it is a difficult time for patients who are struggling to afford cannabis prescriptions. But there is things that we can do. One of the initiatives that the I Am Billy Foundation is working on right now is an initiative called RESCAS. It's a refractory epilepsy panel at Great Ormond Street, whereby children like Billy can be referred to be assessed for NHS-funded medical cannabis prescriptions. We have a number of medical manufacturers who have kindly gifted these vulnerable, chronically ill children their medicine while we take them through the process. And today, I want to show my appreciation to Bod Australia, MGC Pharma, and of course our dear friends at Cellon, who also have just recently gifted over £3,000 worth of medicine to PTSD and pain patients for prescription cannabis. All of this coupled together is quite simply one of the most crucial steps forward to NHS funding for these vulnerable chronically ill patients. And of course, for me, children with epilepsy are very, very dear to my heart. So let me tell you something. There is no medical manufacturer should be charging thousands of pounds of for life-saving medicines to vulnerable chronically ill children. Now I've got my papers mixed up. Well, he was pulling at me before I started that. Right? I know, I just leave everything in balloons. Like, I know. But so I just wanted to say on that note, for me, medical manufacturers, it's incredibly important that they do come forward and they do somehow set up new initiatives to try and gather the safety, the evidence in the safety and the efficacy of their medicine. And look, I am incredibly grateful to, as I said, Bod and Cellon and MGC Pharma, because there's some of those families are here today and they are just incredibly grateful because now the financial burden has been lifted off their shoulders and they can start to lead some sort of normal life. But thank you to everyone who stuck here with us during some of Billy and I's most difficult times. And thank you even more to those who believed that we had it in us to fight hard enough to see this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, so now I will introduce Anush, who will be hosting our first panel for the day.
Hello, everyone. So, Ollie, Carly, and that's you. Alcione, and Graham, please join us. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to be here for the relaunch of the UPA. My name is Anush Desai. I'm a lawyer and host of a long-running podcast called The Cannabis Conversation. Got a great selection of speakers here. We just met Charlotte. Obviously, everyone knows who Charlotte is. We've also got Carly Barton, another prominent advocate and founder of CanCard. Got Ollie Jembash, who's an advocate and is working on a documentary called Skunk Madness. Who's next there? We have Alcione from Drug Science, who's managing the T21 study. And we have Graham Woodward, who is Client Services Director for Lever Clinics. Great lineup, lots of knowledge here to share. We're here to talk about barriers to access, and so we're going to explore medical cannabis prescribing in the UK from a few different angles and some of the challenges around that. There's a Q&A at the end, so please do save up your questions for then. So as we briefly discussed before, medical cannabis was officially legalised back in 2018, but it's fair to say that things have been a bit slow in terms of progress. Let's start with Carly, maybe you, in terms of scene setting. Where are we? How's it going from a patient perspective?
In terms of the legal access or just general access?
Yeah, just from both. In terms of practical.
I think, so this panel is about barriers to access, and I think one of the things that came out of our recent polling of CanCard members, so the CanCard community is growing massively, which I think is a sign that there's a lot wrong with the legal system at the moment. But I think there's a lot also that can be learned from this portion of people who are utilising cannabis that is not necessarily being looked at by the industry. So we're fortunate enough to be able to poll our members, and they're very forthcoming. And I think that there's three sort of barriers to people transitioning to the legal market that we see coming up in polling quite a lot. One of them is price, and I know that that's, you know, the likes of Drug Science are doing some really good stuff around that, which is great to see, although slow. Quality is another one. Quality and consistency comes up a lot. So people might find a strain that really, really helps them, and then they might never be able to get it again. Or the next batch might come full of mould, or seeds or stalks, or maybe there will be a delay, and they will have in the delivery, and they will have to go back to Dave round the corner, which is another issue. And the last one is a sort of variation on, this is the one that interests me, the barrier, and it's a variation on they don't represent me. They're words that we put together from a series of thousands of people coming when we said, why is it that you're not transitioning to the legal market? And they don't represent me was one of the top ones. And I think that there's a lot of issue around identity, I think, when we're talking about this plant. And people have arrived at this plant in a different way. So they've been to the doctors for years. They've often been on loads of different drugs. They've often then lost faith and trust and hope in those doctors that have given them those drugs, which they've become addicted to or they've had side effects of. And the way that they've found cannabis is often via a different route. And then to try and push those things together, there is a real big conflict. And I think the biggest issue that we're seeing at the moment in terms of transitioning people to legal market, which isn't our job, but is an interest as we move things forward, is the whole cannabis is part of my identity, it's mine, it's not theirs, they're big pharma or big corporations coming to take this thing that is mine. Also, you're telling me how to take it, you're telling me what strains I can have, what strains I can't have. It'll depend what's in the pharmacy, it'll depend if you're going to be able to send it to me without mould. So there's a lot of loss of control. There's a big loss of control when people step into that market. And the recent figures show that it was just, I think it was 69% of people who had tried a private prescription hadn't lasted 3 months. And that isn't everybody by all means, but it's a great indicator that things could be better. So yeah, I think that we need to move towards including people, including patients. There's a real big issue around identity loss and control loss when you put it in the hands of people that of institutions that people no longer trust. And I think we need to think about ways in which we can democratise the ownership of this plant moving forward.
Thank you. And great work that you're doing at CanCards. Loads of interesting issues there. I think consistency seems to be one that I often hear. And Charlotte, maybe you can, do you want to grab that mic actually? Maybe you can kind of talk about it from a parent perspective, because I assume consistency is one of the big things that's important for you as well. But how are you sort of seeing the barriers at the moment?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is cost is a huge barrier for children, whether it be children with epilepsy or kids that are being prescribed, for ADHD or autism or whatever the case is. The children's medicine seems to be a lot more expensive on a monthly basis for their monthly prescription than the adults, which I find just quite unbelievable, really. I support a huge number of families. Some of those families are paying anything between £800 to just over £2,000 a month. But like I said earlier when I spoke, we do have a number of medical manufacturers that have came forward and are now kindly gifting these children their medicine. We are still struggling with one, to two of those medical manufacturers, and those ones, which is quite interesting for me, are the ones that are actually charging the £2,000 a month. So they're the ones that won't gift the kids their medicine. And there's one particular medical manufacturer that's charging that incredible, it's just unreal, that amount of money. If you just sit back and think about it, how on earth can anybody, or even anybody in this room, where do you get £2,000 a month from now? In particular, with the cost of living crisis. But what's interesting is, if one of my families travelled to Holland and bought this product in Holland at the pharmacy in The Hague, they could actually buy it cheaper than what this medical manufacturer has decided to sell it to the families for getting it in the UK. So I think there really needs to be a lot of more. What patients can do for me is a lot more talking about the cost, and as I said, in particular with children with epilepsy, I really do believe that there is no medical manufacturer should be charging those families that amount of money every month. It is wrong. It is shameful, and it is just downright cruel. And that's how I feel about the whole. I feel really strongly about that.
No, I mean, thank you for bringing that up. So it's a huge issue. I mean, that £2,000 a month is a crazy amount of money for anyone. So cost and consistency are a couple of themes that we just talked about. I mean, it's an open question to the rest of the panel. If you could change one thing, what would it be? Maybe Ollie, do you want to talk?
I mean, it's an interesting one. There's a lot of practical, logistical things that we can talk about. My perspective as a current legal patient, and from working on a documentary about cannabis and mental health, it really seems like the whole industry is kind of rested by this fear around cannabis, this all-pervasive fear around cannabis, that, it has to be so tightly controlled because, God forbid, we have a mental health crisis, God forbid, we have loads of people with schizophrenia and psychosis. And it seems to be, and this is not to disparage the people in the clinics, I've had a lot of good experience with doctors, but it also seems to be like the people prescribing aren't necessarily that knowledgeable about cannabis. And I often say to people that there's a lot of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and that we're trying to maybe over-pharmaceuticalize, if that's a word, this medicine, which doesn't necessarily work like all other medicines. It's a holistic plant which benefits people on a multitude of levels, to then try and kind of get it into the point of, well, you're prescribed this exact strain for this exact condition, and we know that you're prescribed this amount per month. It's too finicky, it's too many barriers in place, because we're trying to treat it like all other medications, all other controlled substances. It's not the same. It's a plant. People are using it very differently to how they're using things like prescription cocodamol. And I think until we have a kind of paradigm shift, where ordinary people who don't necessarily know a lot about cannabis, but who are in the position where they're either a consultant or they have lots of money to set up a clinic, and I think it's a really good idea for a business, until that kind of shift happens, where we have maybe more of a democratization, where there's more cannabis people involved in the prescribing process in the clinics, then I still think we're going to have a lot of this fear that's going to make the journey quite difficult for patients.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie. Kenny, do you want to?
So the question was what we want to change.
Well, if you could have a magic wand and one thing you could change.
Yeah, so for us at Drug Science, the thing we want to see the most is medical cannabis being available on the NHS. That would make it widely accessible. That would solve those issues with cost, and hopefully there would be more training for doctors organized by the NHS, so that everyone can have the necessary knowledge to be able to prescribe. Another thing would be GP prescribing, because at the moment medical cannabis is prescribed only by specialist doctors, and there is not as many specialist doctors as there is GPs, of course, and obviously there's more costs associated with using specialist doctors rather than GPs. So these two things would massively change the landscape, I believe, and this is so Project 2021 is the biggest medical cannabis study in the UK, and it was set up to hopefully help with exactly this. So we're collecting data to provide the evidence base for legislation change. We do hope that our data will help influence that decision to move medical cannabis from the private sector to the NHS, and I will talk about that more in a bit as well. Yeah, thank you.
Graham, do you want to give us perspective?
Firstly, I just wanted to thank our friends at UPA, Clark and Ollie, for inviting me, particularly here today. It's a real privilege. I think this is a really, if I could change anything, I'm a nurse by background, and it's really, I find it really, really bizarre that doctors will prescribe tramadol, fentanyl, gabapentin, pregabalin, Oromorph, you name it, they will prescribe it. But as soon as you want to prescribe a plant, it frightens the hell out of them. It frightens them completely. And I'm not picking on, I'm a nurse, as I said, I'm not picking on doctors per se, and I'm not picking on GPs or any specialist doctors, but I find this blinkered view of it's the devil's work really, really, really kind of soul-destroying, to be honest with you, because I've been a nurse for 27 years, and I've never worked in an area of medication or of disease or of condition where patients have benefited so well from a medication. You know, we give antipsychotics, they work, some works, they don't, they give an anxiolytic, this antidepressant works, this one doesn't work, they switch. But they manage the condition, they don't actually help the patients, and when it doesn't help, they put more painkillers on, or more antidepressants, or more anxiolytics, etc. But they never think, well, actually, what about, we've tried all of these, have you thought about trying medical cannabis? It's literally thought of as a no-no, and I think that goes back to maybe education from someone trying to get in, maybe. Maybe it goes back to education when medical students are going through medical school. Maybe cannabis could be introduced in some way, even if it's one module, so it makes people more aware. And if you look at the models across the world, where, is it 21 states in America now it's legal to have recreationally and prescribed, and Canada's the whole of Canada, Germany, and yet we are like, oh no, we're going to create the next opioid epidemic. So if I could change anything, I think it would be more openness from doctors, GPs, consultants, whatever, to try alternative. We talk about organic and alternative therapies. Let's have this more recognised as an alternative therapy. That would be mine.
Cool, thank you, Graham. And Kylie, what's your key change that you'd like to see?
Thank you. I think I will be greedy, and my one thing would be everything. So I don't think I can rest, which means I've got a long bloody wait, but it's fine, until there is access in all possible ways. I don't think we can meet everybody's needs in this room, let alone in the rest of the country, until access is widespread. So until you can, the likes of Charlotte with Billy, who we all know and love, can walk into the doctors and get that on prescription. Until we have cooperative grows growing for people in the community. Until we are allowed to plant a fucking seed and not get arrested. All of those. We need all of those. And I'm not going to stop till we get them.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, education, I think, is a key one. And Graham, maybe going back to you, how are you seeing that from the sort of private clinic world and the need for, you talked about doctor education when they're students and stuff. How are you seeing that in general as a barrier?
Yeah, I guess as I've kind of already said, that's a great question. I think more and more GPs are less resistant than they were. We have patients come into the clinic who say that their GP is going to not have them treat them or provide their medication. They drag their heels on providing their summary care records or their medical history so that we can't prescribe for them because of the current laws around or legislation around prescribing. So, as I've already said, and I don't want to repeat myself, I think we need, as a community, as nurses, as doctors, to almost do a kind of roadshow of workshops where we go out and educate doctors on the benefits of cannabis. And I honestly can tell you, as I said, I've been a nurse for 27 years. I've worked in cannabis now since it was legalised, and I've never seen the benefit. Patients who have now gardening because their pain is better. Young people who can now go out of the house, who have been completely socially isolated, start driving lessons. You know, sometimes I feel a bit uncomfortable because I almost feel like I'm a bit acting like a salesman. But honestly, in 27 years, I haven't seen a disease area. I call it disease because I'm looking at the whole, spectrum of illnesses that people benefit from cannabis. But in a whole area where people benefit, I think 95% of our patients come through the door, stay with us, or benefit in some way and go on to another cannabis clinic. Very few patients drop out because it didn't work. They might drop out because, as Charlotte said, because of the cost, but they don't drop out because of, there's no benefits. Small numbers. So what was the second? There's a second part of that question, wasn't there?
It's just, and also how is the private clinic model working in terms of servicing patients? Yeah.
So I think looking at the numbers, so I also am an advisor to the Care Quality Commission, so I look at clinics that are coming through. And there's approximately 20 active clinics with registration, and there's another 10 coming through, so that's 30 clinics potentially in England. There's an estimated 30,000 patients currently receiving a medical cannabis prescription. I don't believe that number is accurate. I think that's exaggerated. I think it's a lot less than that personally. But we're fortunate because our CEO, who's actually sitting in the audience here, spends 95% of his time trying to get investors or people with deep pockets to invest in the clinic, and because of their own reasons, because basically they've either benefited from cannabis themselves, or their family has benefited from cannabis, or they believe in a cannabis model. So we don't all drive Ferraris. I came on the train just like a lot of people do. We don't make a profit as a clinic. We need to have a lot of patients. I mean, thousands of patients coming through the door to make a profit. But fortunately, as I said, our CEO, Eric Bistrom, spends a lot of time going out, speaking to investors to try to support us in the work that we're doing. So, and the more clinics that come through, I think that they come through thinking that there's a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but there really isn't. Obviously, as a private clinic, you need to make money, and hopefully at some point we will. But not all the clinics are supported by big licensed producers or big, pharma, etc., etc. So the private clinic model is a challenging one. And obviously there are lots of forums where people talk about this clinic does this and this clinic doesn't do that, and etc., etc. And you hope at some point. Maybe that's a good point to stop. Cut me off.
Sorry, do you want to?
Or I can just speak if you can hear me. Oh, yeah, okay. I've lost my train of thought now. So yeah, I think ultimately, I have a great team. I work for a great clinic. We have great patients, and I actually really believe in cannabis as a treatment option. And I truly believe, if you look at the estimated figures, 1.4 to 1.8 million people currently using medical or using cannabis for medical purposes, then please, seek treatments. And then maybe if more people come into treatment, then prices and costs can go down and it become accessible to more and more people. I'll shut up now.
Thank you. I think, we've talked about it. I think the key is obviously getting cannabis prescribed through the NHS. That will massively increase access. A constant refrain from the medical establishment is there's not enough evidence to support medical cannabis. Alcione, maybe it's a good time for you to sort of step in and talk about where are we at with the research?
Yeah, so they keep claiming there's not enough evidence, and that's because they're mostly looking for evidence from clinical trials. So clinical trials are really difficult to perform, they're extremely expensive, and we know that medical cannabis benefits conditions that are very rare, like rare forms of epilepsy. So there is not enough patients for a pharmaceutical company to be interested to perform a clinical trial for rare conditions such as these. So what Drug Science has done is we funded Project 2021, which is an observational study. So essentially, we have participating clinics like Leva Clinic, for example, who are able to register patients on the project, and then we follow patients up every 3 months and ask them to complete some questionnaires so that we can track their progress and see if their symptoms are improving, how they're getting on with their medical cannabis treatment. So patients complete questionnaires at the initial evaluation, so that's usually before they've started their medical cannabis treatment, unless they're coming from a different clinic. And then every 3 months, and they're followed up for a maximum of 4 years. So we really want to see in the long term what happens. Are there any side effects? How does medical cannabis compare potentially with other pharmacological medications? So at the moment we have more than 3,500 patients, which definitely makes it the biggest medical cannabis study in the UK, potentially in Europe. And what we're seeing is we're seeing amazing results, as Graham already mentioned, in regards to quality of life. So patients' quality of life improves massively with medical cannabis. So they're more able to perform daily activities, they're more able to engage with friends, some of them are able to go back to work. So there is a lot of improvement and quality improvement that makes a massive difference to the patient. Additionally, we also see improvements in sleep. We see improvements so half of our patients are chronic pain patients, and that can be conditions like arthritis, endometriosis, and any kind of condition that causes chronic pain. And chronic pain patients are usually prescribed opiates quite a lot to deal with this pain. Opiates have a lot of side effects, as some of you may know. They come with a whole range of side effects. They cause blurred mind. Their patients are not really able to be present and be there for their families and their lives. So one of the most amazing findings that we've seen so far with T21 is opiate sparing. So that means that patients, without being asked from their doctors, they felt that they no longer had to keep taking the same amount of opiates that they were taking before. So as they progressed with their treatment, we found that there was a reduction in almost 50% of the amount of opiates that patients were using. So that again translates into amazing quality of life improvements, because the side effects of the opiates have also now been eliminated. And also, just briefly about side effects as well. So medical cannabis, so far on the study, doesn't have any major side effects. The most commonly noted side effects are red eyes, dry mouth, which when compared with the side effects from opiates are not serious at all. There's only a small proportion of patients who report any side effects, and almost 95% of them are not severe. So we really are seeing that it's an effective medication, it is safe, it is tolerated, and there's no reason why it shouldn't become a first-line treatment, why patients would have to go through the pharmaceutical route first before trying medical cannabis. When we know that it's working for so many patients, we share a newsletter every month, and on it we share sometimes quotes from patients, because really they're very moving, and it's what gives us the motivation to like keep on going, even though it's a difficult. There's a lot of issues in the field, and it can sometimes feel difficult. But we see patients saying that they were not able to go outside before because of their anxiety. There's patients that have been in the house for a year, not able to enjoy their lives, and suddenly now they can go to events, they can go to university, they can do things, continue with their lives. So really, it is working.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
So I think Alcione raised something that just sparked in my head here. So I'm asking all of you and anybody that you know that's prescribed or that uses cannabis or medical cannabis is prescribed and have stopped or reduced your opiates, your anxiolytics, whatever medication that you have stopped or started to reduce, please tell your prescribing doctor. Because what we find is that we have patients that come in and they reduce their tramadol use, but they still get the prescription every month, but they just don't pick the prescription up. Or they pick the prescription up and it stores in the cupboard. And the GPs will continue, or whoever your prescribers, will continue to prescribe that as long as you don't tell them that you don't need it anymore. So as an education point of view, from a prescriber's point of view, if you make them aware that you've reduced your gabapentin, your pregabalin, your oromorph, your tramadol, etc., that will then hopefully make them think more about, well, actually cannabis is reducing this, but that's not recorded enough, and we really need that to be captured. So, as I said, please, if you are reducing any form of your medication because cannabis is replacing that, inform the prescriber and get your family, friends, uncles, aunts, whatever, to also do the same, because that's the way that the NHS will then think, oh, actually, this is having an overall quality of life benefit because this is being reduced and that's being reduced. So, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, really interesting to bring up the issue of clinical studies versus observational data, which is obviously a bit of an issue for the medical establishment. And maybe we'll go into that a bit in the questions, but before we go into that, Ollie, I just want to come to you. Mental health is like the bogeyman in the room when we talk about cannabis, and obviously you've been covering this in Skunk Madness in your documentary. How much are you seeing that as a barrier and people using that as a reason to be scared of cannabis usage?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start by saying I'm not a mental health professional at all. I've just been an advocate in the psychedelic space and the cannabis space for the best part of 15 years now. And I've been a cannabis user probably for about, going on 20 years now. I understand 100% there are people who shouldn't be using high THC cannabis. But surely all of the paradigm is just totally muddied by the fact that we haven't had legal access for such a long time. All that's been available is high THC cannabis on the street. Often people using it as an escape from not necessarily a good situation. People, not having a kind of integrated way of using cannabis as a holistic medicine in society. Having to deal with people on the street who are selling it to them illegally, entering into situations which might make them feel anxious. And when, you know, we're speaking to people as part of this documentary, it's actually quite hard to find people who have had serious issues with cannabis. You know, me and Clark know people who have had problems with cannabis and decided it's not for them, they don't want to use it anymore, but actually trying to find people who have had something like a psychotic episode who want to talk to us is quite difficult. So it's kind of like we don't necessarily encounter this, we don't see this. You know, when we were at Product Earth, so many people were coming up to our stall saying, you know, if this was true what the media's been saying about cannabis, then surely like there'd be one person here out of 5,000 people having a psychotic break with the amount of cannabis that's being consumed in 3 days. Like, you would expect to see it, and it's weird to have all of this kind of media bias and stuff from the government over the past 20 years telling people if you smoke cannabis you're going to go crazy, and then not actually experiencing this in our daily lives. And I think, you know, it is something that really needs to be addressed, but it's not being addressed with what I feel is kind of adult, mature conversation about a plant. It's all kind of backed up by years of fear, and then now the pharmaceutical and medical model trying to like rejig how they view things and go, oh, okay, cannabis is actually all right, okay, let's, you know, we can start prescribing it all. We've got to take a course so we know how to prescribe it all. We can't do this, we can't this, you know, barriers, as I said earlier. And, you know, it seems to be from the data with Project 2021, and again, people that we speak to, that people aren't having these serious issues. And I even saw something from Sapphire, I think, that was talking about legally prescribed cannabis versus, you know, illicit cannabis. And they were saying like, oh, you know, you've got to be careful because cannabis on the street is way, way stronger. And then Advent are prescribing something which is 27% THC. I've never found anything like that on the street. I would have loved to have found something that's 27% THC. I would have bitten the hand off the dealer. But like, you know, I'm sorry, but it's just all this kind of mindset that like this is a really dangerous thing. And again, it's kind of similar with psychedelic medicines. There's all of this talk around harm reduction. Everything is about the harms. You can't do that because it's got to be, you know, reduce the harm. And actually, that might not necessarily be the best point to start from. It might be, you know, is this less harmful than all these other things? You know, is this actually a safer thing? You know, as far as I understand with the Hippocratic Oath, there's a principle of first do no harm, which is prescribing a safer medicine before you prescribe all these other things. So again, you know, we need a paradigm shift, and I don't know where it's going to come from, whether it's education or whether it's got to be top-down legislation to move it into Schedule 3 or 4 so that it's not in this weird Schedule 2. Whether, you know, as Carly said, and I think it is, you've got to have all these different fronts to kind of to change it, let people grow, let people have a plant in their house so that, you know, I don't know, your 80-year-old grandma can see that it's not a scary thing. And I think, yeah, that's where we need to get to with all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Education, as always, is needed. Right, I'm going to throw it open to the crowd now. If any of you have any questions, let me just drop down there.
What do you feel about, you're talking about mental health of people, what about the health of the plant, what I call mutant crackweed, these plants who have lost all their elemental connection, taken away from their mother, put into rock wool, pumped with chemicals, artificial light. It's creating a plant which is totally out of balance. My hope is that people get into growing cannabis naturally and have a natural healing from it. And I was just wondering what your feelings are about this mutant crackweed, as I call it.
Thanks, Free. Always good to hear your perspective. And this is something that I have said to people a lot, and I think I'm the only person that's asked this question, is what does cannabis think about all of this? As cannabis as a conscious entity, what does it actually think about the way in which this industry is working, the way in which it's, as you said, being put into these artificial conditions? I mean, I just had the benefit, and I'll happily admit, being in Kent and got some lovely Kentish sunshine-grown orange kush, and I was like, why am I in like the best mood that I've ever been in for weeks? Oh, because it's had the whole UV spectrum, it's grown in soil, it's grown in a garden, it's not, you know, it's grown by someone I know who's given it loads of love. these things are really important. And when you are, you know, it's a problematic thing, right? How do you ensure that you supply loads of people and then you've got to do stuff like dry it really quickly? You might not do a good curing process. You, for some reason, have to use radiation. I'm not sure why, you know, that's not really sure why we've got to do that, but you know, and it's capitalism. I'm not here to preach against capitalism, but it's kind of the way in which all other industries work. It's like any craft thing, any, you know, you bake a cake at home, it's often going to be nicer than one you buy in the shop. So it's a similar kind of thing. You know, you put love into stuff and it will be better. And I think, you know, going back to what Carly says, if we can have all these different fronts and we eventually get, I mean, we've got an amazing craft industry just waiting to come. It's like insane. We've got some of the most talented people in the world who are giving this plant loads of love. But the way in which things have happened is all of these big companies have come in who aren't necessarily that knowledgeable. And I think cannabis is probably quite upset. Yeah. Don't want to speak for it, but, you know, that's my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, well said.
Hi, I've just gone through the worst 60 days of my life just so I can keep my driving licence. I've smoked cannabis for 30 years, and ever since I've stopped it, I've had the worst panic attacks, I've had the worst pain, but I've had to just go through that just so I can keep my driving licence. How easy is it? How come out of 11,000 people, only 5 people could get Sativax spray off their doctor, which will actually suppress arthritis rather than make it regenerate? Why can't we let doctors prescribe Sativax more? And how easy is it to get access to it and legally drive?
I can take the bit on driving. Someone else wants to take the bit on side effect. Yeah. So the issue with driving at the moment is really shit, and I'm really sorry I've had to go through that because there's so many people in that situation. If you need help, just call the CanCard helpline. We'll get you some help. So the issue is when they changed the law and they made cannabis available on private prescription, there are essentially, when you look at the laws around driving under the influence, there are 2 columns of drugs. One of them is illicit drugs, illegal drugs, and the other one are prescribed drugs, right? So if you're caught driving and you've got opiates in your system, but you've got a morphine prescription, they can look at that column and go, okay, he's got a prescription in his system, that's fine. When they changed the law, they did not put cannabis from the illegal column into the Section 5A, I think, of the Driving Under the Influence Act. They did not move it over from the illegal column to the prescription column. So at the moment, everybody who has got a prescription, and I've been through many lawyers to talk about this, is actually, even if the clinic says, drive if you feel safe to do so, you can be prosecuted for driving under the influence with your prescription. And that is just a paperwork exercise that the government did not do. Well, they didn't do anything bar change that and bar make that amendment. Anything that surrounds it, and we know that cannabis feeds into our housing, our family courts. We know that it feeds into our workplace. We know that it feeds into all of these aspects of our life, of which none of those elements of regulation and policy that feed into all of the other areas of our life, including driving, have been considered when that law was changed, and driving is one of those things. But if you need help, give us a shout, and I'll let someone else answer the Sativax question.
Yeah, so for Sativax, for anyone who might not know, is one of the 3 medical cannabis products that are available on the NHS. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's a bit of a postcode lottery. Some areas prescribe it, some don't. There's no reason for that. It shouldn't be like that. Everyone should have access to it. Again, I think it comes down to education, stigma, and then also funding, because some of the areas are just claiming that there is not enough funding to be able to prescribe this medication, unfortunately. This is why we need to keep advocating, keep pushing for policy change, keep pushing for education. At Drug Science, we're doing a lot of events in regards to education, so we've had one with GPs as well, trying to educate GPs about it and change their attitudes, because we find that some of them are not necessarily opposed, they just don't know enough to be able to feel confident about it. So when they're asked about patients, they're like, oh, I don't know. So we're hoping that by doing these events, by reaching out, we're also reaching out to students. Max is doing an amazing work at creating events at universities, which hopefully, for medical students, for example, so hopefully this will have a knockdown effect, like later on. It will be a few years, but we are educating the next generation of doctors, so we are hoping that things are changing.
I have been told, though, you can go to a private doctor and get Sativax spray, but would I still be legal to drive? I would be legal to drive if I had a prescription for Sativax spray. Not technically. It is so glitchy, it's just madness. And this is a medicine that can suppress arthritis, stop it spreading. I'm the worst, because I've smoked cannabis for 30 years. I stopped it, and my health has just gone way downhill. It's got so much worse. And it's just ridiculous.
And if I can just add to that, I'm sorry what you've had to go through. I think what Carly said is spot on, really. The levels that they've set now within the DVLA is 0.02 micrograms. Yeah, 0.2. So potentially, if you go and buy CBD from a health food shop, you'll be over the limit to drive, which is preposterous, isn't it? 0.02. We have patients that come to us with MS, because Sativex is licensed for MS, and they say, but I've got pain. But if they say to us that their primary condition is MS, we can't prescribe for them because there is already a licensed product for MS, which is Sativex. Sativex, I believe, because of the patients that we speak to, is approximately £450 a month for 3 sprays. And only some boroughs. It used to be PCTs, Primary Care Trusts, then it was CCGs, now it's ICBs. So each ICB, I think there's 41 or 42 of them around the country, they decide what your GPs can prescribe. And if something is deemed, even something like simvastatin, like a cholesterol or drug, they always prescribe you the cheapest statin that they can prescribe you, because of the budgets, and that's the same with Sativex. So, as already mentioned, it's a postcode lottery. So if you're in an area of the country that will fund Sativex, then potentially you can have it. When we've had patients come to us that we've said to them, you need to prescribe your Sativex, you need to speak to your GP. If they come back to us and say that the GP won't prescribe due to budget reasons, then we can prescribe them a medical cannabis prescription. But whilst there's a licensed product that is not readily available or is cost prohibitive, then that's a big barrier. So it is a real postcode lottery, and the DVLA, considering you can have opiates in your body that could make you quite debilitated, but the level of cannabis 0.02 micrograms. It's impossible to have any form of cannabis and not be over the limit with that. It's ridiculous.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've just run out of time. I know there are lots of questions. All right, super quickly.
Hi, my name is Aja. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been invited to this thing to talk about this gateway drug kind of stuff. You spoke about you don't have enough evidence on stuff like enough evidence to say that it's not so bad, but I had to go to rehab to get under my control of my addiction, and there was more people in rehab coming off prescription drugs than there were anything else. It doesn't make sense, I am clean, but I'm still ill, I still have these problems. But if there is something like this going on, I know there's harm reduction clinics for methadone, there's all sorts of stuff, which is insane, right? It's insane. People come through the chemist or a 60 mil or 90 mil meth script, and they're on it for years. I've had people come into the chemist for a 2 mil every day, and they just can't come off it. We could throw that in the bin, you know what I mean? So it's insane, and it is a plant, and everybody should be able to do it in their own house. It's agriculture. That's what I want to say about that.
Thank you.
I'll pass the mic over, and I'm sorry, I'm quite passionate about what we're all trying to do, so I do have a lot to say. But it's interesting, a gateway drug, isn't it? So the reason they look at a gateway drug is because if you go to buy cannabis from a dealer, and they don't have cannabis, but they do have heroin, you're going to go, okay then, well I'll have some heroin then instead of cannabis. I mean, the naivety of that is just so... But I think they use the gateway drug as another reason to not decriminalise it. You know what I mean? It's not the reality. I wouldn't go to buy a TV from John Lewis and come away with a washing machine, would I? You know, it's ridiculous. Sorry about the analogy, but it is ridiculous.
I'm really sorry. Thank you. I've got to wrap it up here. Can you all say thank you to the brilliant panel? Thank you. You're part of Breaking Your Mention.
Yeah.
Ali's a good friend of mine.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love Ali. Yeah, I'm going this year with the documentary.
Oh, awesome. Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm going next week as well.
Oh, wicked.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Let's chat later anyway. Are you right?
I'm up.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Are you...
Check.
Yeah, I don't know what...
No?
Right.
We were running a little bit late.
There's always loads of people.
Can we get Greg up to the stage, please, if he's about?
Ray, do you want to go up, mate? Yeah, go up there, yeah. Right.
Is Dorita around? We're going to be getting on with our next panel very shortly, guys. If you have a chance, make sure that you visit the Hanover room upstairs. Lots of activities going on up there.
In the corner over there.
We got our next panel coming up, which is Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. Please stick around. We'll start, and then you can sort of come onto the side.
Okay, as long as I don't look like a hand when I'm trying to get on stage.
Okay. Yeah, they're just going to come and join in a minute. We'll just get started. Everybody can introduce themselves. Right, ladies and gentlemen, nice to see you all this morning. I am very privileged to be sitting up here on the stage with 4 at the moment giants, but soon to be 5 giants, all of who have been very, very active in their work here in the UK on the decriminalisation, legalisation, liberalisation, whichever word you decide to choose. This panel is called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, and how we can build on what we have done previous and what is what we feel is in store for the future. My name is Sam Cannon. I'm a patient, number one, but I also have the privilege of working in this incredible industry that is been developing in this country for many, many years, and it only seems now that it seems to be coming into the limelight. But the guys who are up on the stage here all have been working very, very hard in their own right. So I'm just going to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll focus on a few different topics. So, Free, over to you.
Hi. Standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, the giant that inspired me was Jack Herrera. Read The Emperor Wears No Clothes, 94. Totally changed my opinion about cannabis. I knew it was something I smoked, but I didn't realise I could build a house out of it, make a car out of it. The multitude of uses of this incredible plant inspired me to leave a legalised cannabis campaign, because they were very disorientated, not up to much, and focused on the legalisation of cannabis. I'm not personally into the legalisation of cannabis because it's a control and regulation of a natural plant by private offshore corporations. It's free cannabis, that's what I'm into. Back in 95, formed the Cannabis Hemp Information Club. Primary aim, raise people's awareness about the history and many uses of this incredible plant. Put on some cannabis conferences in London, opened a cannabis museum in London in 96, I think it was. Amazing. The publicity that followed from that was so worth it. Full front page of the Telegraph, full page feature newspaper, Sunday magazine spreads where for the first time, I think, ever entered into the British consciousness the fact that you could actually build a house out of cannabis or make a car out of it. It totally changed the perspective. The seed had been planted of the potential of this cannabis plant. I left London, moved to Glastonbury, opened a hemp shop in 97. In that year also, well, it was 96, that I felt, great, education is one thing. This legislation needs to be challenged. So Howard Marks and myself did this pop-up cannabis dispensary with a turn yourself in. They went to the Melbourne police station, offered ourselves to arrest. They refused, saying we would prove the point. The point being it's a control through fear. I have no fear of a system which is totally corrupt, criminal, and the whole thing is based on lies. Truth is on our side. This is a naturally healing plant, and all the stuff which says it isn't is lies. Anyway, so challenged it. They refused to arrest me, so in May 1997 I launched this free medical marijuana foundation, continued to supply cannabis, initially free, but then I was taking donations. Did that up until 2005. The only reason I stopped, I could not keep up with the demand. Just couldn't do it. Times moved on. 2014, I believe I was the first person in this country to sell over-the-counter CBD products. And then 2017, I started doing these hemp-aid pop-up cannabis dispensaries, full spectrum. First one done September 2017, 50% CBD, 25% THC. Amazing feedback. One lady, 6 years paralysed with fibromyalgia, one dose, up and gardening, remained mobile ever since, and multiples more. So that's where I'm at the moment. I have a hemp shop, but I'm also running a cannabis dispensary, cash donation from 2 to 25% THC extracts with a 2-to-1 at least balance of CBD to THC. What future do I see is more education, more people becoming aware how cannabis is a dietary essential, as Dr. Portney puts it. It's essential for our health, the essential of this planet, that this plant is free, and we make it free by making it happen. Grow the plant and set it free.
Thanks, Free. I'm Guy Coxall. I started off in the industry. So I was one of the founders of the Cannabis Trades Association back in 2016, 2017. Took on the role as the compliance director for the CBD market. Is there a bit of an echo here? So, we would have meetings with the MHRA, the Food Standards Agency and everything. It was one step forward, 2 steps back. We weren't really getting anywhere. I resigned from the CTA in 2019 and decided to go more on the campaign trail. So I set up a Seed Our Future campaign. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's been running just over 3 years now. So what we're looking at really is the actual law, the legislation, not just the Misuse of Drugs Act and the Misuse of Drugs Regulations, but also the Road Traffic Act. We've had quite a lot of success in court cases. I'll be talking about that in a little while. But yeah, it's been an interesting campaign. Talking of standing on the shoulders of giants, Free was one of my giants, and we've worked together at events, educating people on all the different uses of hemp for quite a few years now. Phil Monk as well from WTU. He was a big inspiration to me to go more into the campaign sort of activism side. So that's it.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dugan. I've been, I'm trying to think now how I first got into cannabis. Well, obviously I started using it when I was quite young. I noticed it helped me with my period pains and helped me with my sleep. So I've used it really since I was a teenager, which I'm not obviously promoting in any way. You know, you just start when you do. But I started more in the campaign back in 2013 is when I really started listening and campaigning and learning more and appreciating cannabis more for what it actually is and its potential and what it does. I was doing a radio show at the time, and we was doing one on with Rick Simpson, who I guess is another giant who's put this information out there. We used to do a radio show with him, and I was just, we'd have people ringing up every day, every time we did a show, so many people ringing up, telling us how it benefited them, how it helped them, how they went from not being able to walk to being able to walk, how they helped with anxiety, emotional issues, physical issues, health-wise. And the more and more I heard about it, and the more I was determined to do something about it, and the more I wanted to do something about it. So then we started doing a campaign all them years ago to do a social club in Spain. That didn't work out for various reasons, but all these years later, 3 years ago, I actually opened up a cannabis club in Spain called Shambhala CSC. And I know firsthand now what the model is like, and I also know firsthand how much benefits these clubs do bring. Basically, they just keep the cannabis within a closed loop, so people grow their own cannabis, the members grow their own cannabis, and then they donate them to the clubs, which is a great way, because then people are growing their own cannabis, and if some people can't grow their own cannabis, then others can grow them for them. And these are only small grows, and I do like small grows rather than these big industrial grows like what Free was mentioning earlier on. You know, that's not really how we want to grow cannabis, not myself. But this is sort of how I'm here today. I was the Yorkshire representative for the UPA years ago, and we had quite a big little group of us getting together and doing regular meetings, and we put on quite a few events. So I was in the UPA all them years ago, and so when Clark asked me to do this again, I thought, yeah, I'll do it, because I do admire a lot of the work that has been done. So, and here's Greg.
Thanks, Sarah.
Here's me. Hi, I'm Greg DeHoot. I founded the UK Cannabis Social Clubs in 2011 after I was diagnosed with Crohn's in 2009, and then got given 2 years left to live in 2010. I quickly realised that there wasn't much help for people in my situation. The cannabis I was able to get hold of at the time was, now that I'm more aware, was just immature cannabis that had been probably ripped off from someone else's grow and then sold before it was dry. And that was just the quality of cannabis at the time. Back then, there obviously was good stuff, but that was what was flooding the market. I experienced a few bad situations. I got mugged once when I was going to get cannabis, just it being mouldy so many times. I thought, you know, I really need to do something about this. I had friends that lived in America, and they lived in, fortunately, medical cannabis states that had already legalised it on their ballot initiatives. And they told me to get the fuck out of England and come over there and get access to the oil, and I did that, and within about 6 months my life had turned around. My health wasn't an issue really, and I came back here. When I was in America, I went to a lot of dispensaries, different grows. I worked with a lot of different activists from organisations like NORML. They were the first cannabis legalisation organisation in the world. National Organisation for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It was actually started by a guy called Keith Stroop, and it was funded initially by Hugh Hefner, So if you're talking about giants, the original money for the cannabis legalisation campaign came from Playboy. And they were actually continued to be big supporters of legalisation in America for many, many years, probably up until Hugh's death. He was running fundraiser events to help fund legalisation efforts. People like Todd McCormick, they were there at the beginning. He's done a lot of time for helping cannabis patients. He was a cancer patient himself that overcame a number of terminal cancer diagnoses. And people like that really inspired me to just not really care about the consequences and just push forward. I tried so hard to get my MP on board, and they wouldn't listen, Conservative MP. Just wouldn't budge on it. The GP wouldn't prescribe it. Access to the only legal medicine at the time was Sativex, and it just seemed like, you know what, there isn't any options, no one's doing anything. The legalisation effort in the UK was a desert, really. There was a few people making a little bit of noise, but there was nothing significant, no coordinated charge to group people together and to push forward in a direction. So I and a few others, Clark and Orson Boone, we said, let's set up the cannabis social clubs. We did that very quickly. We got a good response. We had 30 clubs within about a month, like say, we're interested in doing this. And then it was a talking situation. We had to consult each other. We went to different businesses, head shops, hydro stores around the country, and just to try and get an idea of what was going on, what they wanted to see, what we thought needed to happen. So we wrote the Cannabis Social Club model. We wrote a tagged plant collective model where people could grow their own as a member of the club. They'd use the cannabis they needed, and then they would offer the rest of the club, and it was sold to the rest of the members at a fair trade price, much like on the donation basis that Rob is talking about, really. And that just grew into a situation where people wanted a physical place to get together and socialise in. So clubs like Brighton, we started doing the sessions, as they're called, monthly get-together with the members. We rented a venue. We had to come up with, work out all the logistics, because obviously everything we were doing was illegal at the time, but we knew the importance of it to bring people together. And in Brighton, we've had a few really nice venues. We had one that was 5 stories. On the bottom floor, we had like it was more of a vape lounge situation, and then up the top, so a bit more like Barcelona down the bottom, and then on the 5th floor was a bit more like Amsterdam, coffee shop, a bit more smoky vibe. But there was something where everyone made people feel like they were valued as a member of the community. And it gave a lot of people around the country who came to these events the idea that we could do this where we are, and what's stopping us. We helped facilitate that as the UK Cannabis Social Clubs from 2014 to 2019. And if you were involved in it, you would have seen how big it got. It was to the point where we thought maybe we are going to get legalisation with the right to grow. But then medical campaign really came along, the big money came in, and it was in their interest to have a prescription medicine service only, and that's what we've got. And we kind of asked for it. We asked for a regulated cannabis market, we asked for medical cannabis, so we can't be too surprised, but that is what we have landed with. But I think it has been a bit devastating for the club movement, the recreational movement, because it's not that we were hiding behind medical, it was what we were campaigning for, and we were supporting the patient's rights to be able to have this access and this service. But now we've got that, I think it's made it a little bit harder for the recreational side to use the same kind of system with the clubs to say this is what we're doing, because they can't just hide behind medical anymore. Now there are obviously clubs that are still operating, and they're doing well. Like up in the north, Teesside Club is absolutely smashing it. They've got good support system from the local authorities though. Whereas down here in Brighton, we never had the support from the police crime commissioner or the local police force. They knew what we were doing. They didn't really want to ruffle the feathers, but we didn't have that security that we weren't just going to get raided at any time just because we didn't have that approval. So I think there's there's progress to be made still. I think it's probably going to be harder than it was before because the playing field has changed. Every time something happens, I feel like it's a Rubik's Cube, and you've got to relearn the faces. You've got to work out where you are again because it changes, and it is multifaceted. It's not just this. It's not just recreational. It's not just medical. There's business side of it. There's lots of ancillary businesses as well that provide valuable services to it. I just think that there is something that can be done in this country. There's the thing that we want to be done and the thing that the British government probably wishes they could have done, and then it's finding the middle ground there. But then we've got things like Germany who are pushing forward with legalisation, and I do wonder how much that's going to influence what goes on over here.
Thank you, Greg. Dorita.
I'm a little bit nervous, but yeah, I'll crack on. My name is Dorita. I'm from the Midlands area. I am an ex-lecturer, stroke assessor, stroke jack of all trades. Spent a lot of my time in hospitality and in sales. I came across the industry back in 2015-16 at Product Earth. I can actually proudly say that it was Anthony Linzer, who's sat at the back of the room, and Greg De Hoyt, who actually gave me my first introduction into the industry from Product Earth, initially Product Earth, meeting them there. And actually when I went to Product Earth, I felt like a child in a sweetie shop. I mean, initially I have consumed cannabis from the age of 16, and when I went to Product Earth, I thought, oh my God, there's all this stuff going on in the UK and I don't know about it. I felt really exhilarated. But yeah, meeting Greg, meeting Anthony, meeting the Pure Sativa team, and who else did I meet? Jeff Ditchfield, the legend Jeff Ditchfield I met, who up until quite recently, until he passed away, was my mentor, my core mentor. Anything I needed to ask regarding the cannabis industry, I'd go to him. After going to, just flipping back, after going to Product Earth, I then was invited to Green Pride that went on successfully for a number of years. It was absolutely a fantastic event, which was organised by the Brighton Cannabis Club, and just met so many wonderful people. I remember speaking to Greg, and Greg said to me, Dorita, go back to Birmingham and open a club that's going to stay open. So yes, reluctantly went back to Birmingham, opened a small club initially. Probably 70% of our consumers were medical consumers. Jeff became the patron of our club and supported us, and went as far as giving us goodies like the vaporizer, the Volcano vaporizer machine, and learning us how to make oils and things like that. He was actually a really intrinsic part of the club. We did have the support of the local police, but when it came to the regional police, they kind of shied away. We did invite them to our events, which was literally every event we had, we used to invite the police to our local events. We had the support of the local MP and a lady who, in fact, her name was Dr. Judith Yates. She works with the World Health Organisation, and she works with us as well to try and help educate people locally. But yes, my experience and my main reason for getting into the industry, because back then in 2016, my mum was diagnosed with dementia. I initially was looking for oils I was purchasing oils from Holland and then also from Spain, and then realised I could actually get it here in the UK, which is absolutely wonderful. My mum's since passed away, but it's quite interesting because even down to my mum's last couple of days when she was alive, we were still giving her the cannabis oil, and the staff at the hospital were okay with us still giving her the cannabis oil to relieve her pain and to let her go in a more peaceful manner. The Compassion Club that we actually developed in the Birmingham area was pretty successful to some extent, but then we always kind of hit a block with other people coming in and probably wanting to take over. And as a female, yes, I've got quite a few brothers, it's really, really difficult as a female in the industry, but I think it's actually turned now, from speaking to Sam, that there are growing numbers of females in the industry, and they've become forerunners and making things happen.
Thank you, Dorita. I think there's a little bit of a running theme, you know, and it continues from the previous panel as well, is access, education. And I think what on this panel, the clubs, and recently with what Germany has brought forward with home grows of 3 plants and social clubs that actually are not for profit and supporting the community as a focus of the first stage of a decriminalised, liberalised market. From the work that, you know, Greg, you've been doing, from the work, Sarah, that you've been doing, from the work with a lot of people have been doing in this event today, it seems like the way that we can stand on the shoulders of giants is kind of try and push for that right model that might actually be accepted in this country, that you don't have to worry about the doors being banged down at some point. And how do we get to that stage? And can we take Germany as an example? Teresa, you look like you're wanting to say something. So
no, I just get such joy from like knowing that one of our oldest members who started with us in 2017, a mother and son who live quite locally to myself, they were actually in a situation where the son had a brain tumour. They gave him 3 years left to live. They came to the club. They learned how to grow strain-specific cannabis for the tumour, and then we learnt them how to trim, how to procure their own oils, sent their oils off to lab tests, got the lab tests back to them, for them to become self-sufficient, which I think is the key in the industry, especially as a medical patient, becoming self-sufficient and growing your own cannabis and creating your own oils. It's really, really massively important.
And on that tip, being able to do that, Guy, you've been working on a court case recently that is coming up in August, that if all goes well, we could see the laws changing in this country. Can you tell us a little bit about that, if possible?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, to give you a little bit of background, when we started Seed Our Future, we were looking at no evidence, no crime. So what that meant was looking at the Schedule 1 status and the Class B status of cannabis within the Misuse of Drugs Act and Misuse of Drugs regulations is completely wrong. We all appreciate that, we all know that. But trying to challenge the law directly isn't so easy in the court system. The judicial system's set up so that if you're caught, say, cultivating your own cannabis, that's Section 6 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, that's an illegal offence. So you can try and argue the law, but you're not going to get anywhere. So we've been developing over the last few years. I've spent the last couple of years doing a lot of work on driving offences, supporting people with court cases, and my knowledge of the legal system has developed through that. More recently, a young lad who uses cannabis medicinally, he's had chronic pain for the last 20 years. He was caught cultivating his own for personal use, for personal medical use. And he asked me if I would help him with his case. So we've developed a very solid case challenging the Misuse of Drugs Act and the Misuse of Drugs regulations and a human rights perspective. So what we're looking at really is using the law against the law. So we're using their own tools against them, basically. So we've got this challenge, we put it together. We kindly had some help from a barrister who's a human rights specialist. He helped develop all the legal papers in conjunction with the work that I'd put together. A lot of the work I'd put together was actually based on all the work from the giants in this community over the last several decades. So all of that work has accumulated together like a jigsaw puzzle, and we're just putting in the last pieces here. So basically what we're doing is challenging the Schedule 1 status and the Class B status under several human rights legislations, primarily Article 8, which is right to a private life, but that also includes right to autonomy of health. Now, we should all have a right to our autonomy of health. Autonomy means self-law. So, you know, if you've got a disease and you want to treat yourself with a non-toxic medicinal plant, you should have the right to do that. Also, Article 14 of the HRA, which is discrimination. So, you know, we were talking, in the last panel, they were talking about the amount of people who were prescribed at the moment. If you actually look at the statistics, there's about 2.6 million people who use cannabis in the UK. That's what the government said a couple of years ago. There's about 1.8 million of those who use it medically. That's 69%. So about 70% of people who use cannabis, going off the government official figures, are using it medically. Now, there's about 25,000 patients with prescriptions. That's only 1.4% of everybody who needs it being able generally to afford a private prescription. So it's just, you know, absolutely terrible. This lad here, the defendant, he was cultivating his own, in his privacy of his own house, not bothering anybody, not causing any harms to his own health or harms to society. And, you know, he should be allowed to do that, as should all of us. So, yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we took it to court, Crown Court, and for the first time in UK legal history, the case was accepted by the judge. So the judge read the skeleton legal argument. He took it home overnight to read it through. The next morning he came in with a slight smile on his face. The defendant asked him, you know, did you enjoy the report, Your Honour? And he said, actually, yes, I did. I think there's a defence here to be heard. So what he's done is he's been adjourned until August. We've got a 3-day trial with a jury challenging the Misuse of Drugs Act under several human rights laws. That's never happened before in legal history in the UK. Even the Crown Prosecution Service accepted the defence, and they agreed that, yeah, we need at least 3 days because of the level of the legal argument. The last time, the closest we've ever got to that, talking of Jeff Ditchfield, the Quayle case back in 2005 was a similar case, and they used the common law defence of medical necessity, but also challenging Article 8 of the Human Rights Act. The reason it failed was because the medical necessity charge, they basically said you have to have lost, basically be about to lose a limb or lose your life for it to be medical necessity. They put so much emphasis on medical necessity, it made it, you know, inviolable. And the Article 8 challenge was actually mooted, it never went anywhere. So this is the first time that a human rights challenge is actually taking place. And because the jury are actually going to be making the decision, so it's the people making the decision, I think we've got a good chance of changing the law. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. If we win on the case, I can't give too much details, obviously, because I don't want to jeopardise the case. But if we are successful, it could lead to the decriminalisation of personal use, personal possession, personal cultivation, and non-profit commercial sharing, which would obviously go into the CSC model. It would also help to set up a legal regulated market, as will be trialled in Germany soon. And because it would change the scheduling, it would hopefully help GPs to be able to prescribe as well. So it kind of fits all the keys. It would also help the CBD market, going back to full spectrum, because obviously the reason you're not allowed full spectrum at the minute is because of trace amounts of controlled cannabinoids. If we change it from Schedule 1, say, to Schedule 4, Schedule 5, that will change that. And of course the hemp industry, it will probably make licensing a lot easier. So yeah, so watch this space. We should have a result mid-August, and yeah, if it goes well, then it'd be, we'll all be having a big party.
Excellent. Freya, I'm going to come back to you now, because obviously 30 years campaigning. I think someone threw that number at me the other day. Is it? Almost 30 years. You've done some weird and wonderful things. But, you know, in your time in campaigning and what you've experienced, here we have a legal market operating since 2018, a legal market, the legacy market, which I think is one of the best in the world. And I think eventually when our legacy growers are allowed to actually grow legally and have products on the shelves, we will have some of the best products when it comes to cookies, or whether it comes to gummies, or whether it comes to just the raw flower. We will have one of the best cannabis industries in the world. But in terms of the sort of the change and the sort of the push that's going forward, do you really notice that there's a wave in the closeness to what you've always been able to achieve, or do you still think it's quite far away?
I have no idea, really. It's quite amazing what is happening. There's definitely a massive shift of opinion. Middle England has woken up for cannabis, and it wants it, and it doesn't know where quite to get it. You can't, well, you sort of can buy cannabis online in a few places, but what are you getting? I'm doing what I'm doing in Glastonbury, in the Heart Shack, but I really do feel, well, that's how we hippies in Glastonbury call it, and it sort of resonates out. A model has been set, it's just in one place where one doctor in particular is sending dozens and dozens of their patients to me to get cannabis, which I find quite bizarre. It's quite challenging. It is, me personally, I really look forward to the time when people are just growing it, because I'm sure there's others who are overwhelmed, who've taken up that, challenge of supplying cannabis to people who need it, and they may not be in the position physically to be growing it themselves and doing the extractions or whatever. So, like was mentioned here, is these communities coming together. That's how I feel it moving forward. I watch with interest this, but one important point is there is no law that prohibits cannabis. It's all legislation, rules and regulations which only apply to the legal fiction. Once you know who the legal fiction is and who the live living man, woman is, because there's no law that prevents you as a live living man or woman, child, cultivating or utilising this plant. It's a very deep subject which I'm not going to go into now because it's very complex. But yeah, I really don't know. I watch with interest to see how it all unfolding.
I think we all want to live in this wonderful world where everything is free and we have access to everything. But Sarah, you've operated in a market in Spain with the social club model in kind of a grey area that the Spanish accept, and it's similar, obviously, Greg, with what you've been doing. But Sarah, you mentioned that operating in that space, you're still in the grey area, so you still worry about certain things, and you want better regulation or more. I can't remember the words that you used, but it was more so operating out the grey area and actually being able to operate comfortably.
Well, clear guidelines. If there's clear guidelines, everyone knows what they're doing, don't they? Because in Spain, when you're running a club, you're still running a risk. People who come into your club are running a risk if they leave the club with cannabis as well, because cannabis isn't allowed in the street. It's not legal in Spain. I guess it's kind of similar to the legislation in a way from what Free's saying, but in Spain they really do respect your privacy. So you can smoke, you can cultivate in privacy as long as you're not what they term trafficking, which is basically selling and making a profit from weed. So even if you grow 100 plants in Spain, if they can't prove that you're making any profit out of those plants, you can actually do that. But with the Cannabis Club model, it's very difficult in a lot of ways to always stay within the guidelines if they're not very clear. And it's very difficult. People come over as tourists and want to join your club. They can't join your club. Some clubs accept them, but really you don't want too many tourists. And I still think there's too many restrictions on cannabis. From running my club for 3 years, I've only ever had one bit of trouble, and that was between two brothers. So it was sort of like a long sort of history between them. But that's it. We've never had any trouble. We've never had any sort of experience with people taking too much or anything. Not really. We explain that it's strong. People say, like for me personally, I don't like too high buzzy sativa kind of strains. They can send me a bit funny in the head. I can be a bit paranoid or a bit insecure or a bit anxious on them myself, but because I have so many different strains and I know exactly what strain it is, I myself can choose which ones are best for me or ask somebody else who's tried them which one's that. So that kind of, it takes away a lot of the so-called harms. Normally if I do go a bit funny, it's only for a short period of time. It's not forever, it's not permanent. But I do understand that some, people can be quite particular. And also depending on what sort of medical condition you have, you need to know what sort of strain you're smoking, where it's come from, how it's been grown. And this is all the sort of things that the model, the Spanish model does give you. You do know who's grown your weed. You do know where it's come from. You know, you're not going to go down like what Greg was saying. You're going to go out down somewhere and get mugged. You're not going to. That's not going to happen to you. And the most important thing for me with my club is community. Is that community based? And you know, we've got people from all around the world. We've got Russians, Ukrainians, Icelandic, Danish. We've got people from Ireland, England, Scotland, from everywhere that come together, and they sit and they smoke and they sit and they chat, and they're really sociable, and we have an amazing time. It's a beautiful community, and I really do love it. And in all the clubs, they get together, they play football and do things. You know, there's a proper community spirit there with it, and that's what's important for me. It's good that there's people that live on their own and spend so much time on their own, but yet they feel comfortable to come and sit in my club. You know, we're open all year round, even Christmas Day, to make sure that we are there for people, because that's what it is. It's a social club. That is what it is first and foremost. A safe place for people to come and get a good quality product that helps them. We have people come with medical conditions, and then we can sort of advise what sort of strains. Some people with medical conditions, we've got a lady with a bad leg. She comes in and gets loads of edibles, and she just eats all the cakes, you know. She comes in, and you know, so everyone knows. And it's all obviously clearly marked, and all the oil's tested and that, but it's all clearly marked. So you know when you're getting a cake exactly how much you're getting, what you're getting. You know, I've got ones that are like 62% or milligrams or 100 milligrams. I even do the 500 every now and again for some people, and there's some people that love the 500. Me personally, I wouldn't go anywhere near a 500 mg brownie, no way. But each to their own, isn't it? And I generally find people who use cannabis generally know what they can, what their dosing level is. And with the clubs as well, we're only allowed to take people who have never used cannabis before, which is great recreationally, but that's not good medically. You know, if somebody medically wants to use it, then I will make allowances for them, but really that is one of the guidelines. You know, but when I was in England, the oldest person I helped was a 92-year-old man, because I was a caregiver in England for quite a few years. And he was a Chelsea soldier, and he'd never used cannabis before. And he used it for prostate cancer, and it actually did help him for quite a while. So, you know, these options should be available. And in Spain, when I was talking to my legal advisor, my lawyer, and I told him I was going to be on a panel, he's like, but England UK has medical cannabis. We don't have it, and they don't. So in Spain, their system's better in some ways, but in other ways it's not, because you should be able to get it medically. If you're ill, you should be able to get it through your national health system. You should be able to get it standardised to whatever, and, you know, get a doctor's advice and speak to a doctor who is medically trained. You know, that should be an open option for everyone all around the world, really, especially with how little side effects we keep saying that cannabis has, and how actual beneficial and how life-changing it actually is.
Thank you, Sarah. Conscious of time, we got 5 minutes left. I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience, if anyone raises their hands. If not, I'm going to... Okay, lovely. Let's...
Hi, so I've used cannabis for myself medicinally and spiritually for years. I used to be a medical doctor, I've worked as a GP, I've looked into how medicinal cannabis kind of is being dealt with by the medical profession, and they're not the people to deal with this plant, it's a herb. In my opinion, it's medical herbalists or traditional herbalists who should be dealing with the plant. With other herbs, there's a lot of evidence that kind of taking the active ingredient out of the herb doesn't have that synergistic effect, and it's not as effective as the plant. So I guess my question is, people keep on mentioning about medicinal cannabis. Doctors don't know anything about plants and herbal medicine.
So I think that's been the big initial problem for patients trying to get a prescription, is the process isn't... Well, there's a number of different groups of patients trying to get access. There's people who are becoming aware of it, they've never used cannabis before, they now know it's an option, and because it's not illegal, they're more likely to try it now. And then you've got the us's, who we've had access to the clubs, we've known the traditional cannabis market for years, and then we go to get a prescription, and it's nothing like going to your club, where you can go there, you can see the cannabis, you can smell it, you can ask questions about the strains, and the people who have grown it are probably there, or someone close to that, and you can really get some good feedback on it. People who have used that specific batch to know what the kind of effects are. That tactile nature of cannabis, which has made it so approachable for so many people, has been taken away. And if you've got a problem, I just got a new prescription over the last couple of days come through, and it was packaged a year ago. It's dry as a bone. It's much heavier in CBN now, and like the sativas are making my eyes droopy in the morning. So, like, it's just small little issues like that need to be ironed out. But because of the governing system, because it's governed by the pharmaceutical system of regulations, they're not going to allow that, because that's not how you don't go and smell your paracetamol. Yeah, that's the right one. That one will work for me. I think that is from Grow Farmer. Grow Farm, the product. It's grown in Macedonia, but it's the only one that's not, or one of the only ones that's not irradiated as well. So they irradiate the flower with like a gamma ray to destroy any mold or bacteria that is on it, because they want to make sure you're getting a clean product. Now, some of the product that has come through literally has mold all over it. You can see the bugs on it, but it's been gamma radiated, so it's safe. Like, just these problems need to be ironed out, and yeah, the clubs offer that service, that compassionate, like you were saying, like it's the right thing to do. It's still illegal, and my fear is now that there's big money involved in this, they are going to protect their assets. They're going to protect the money they put down, and if we've got to jump through these hoops, why don't they? So I'm not trying to sound pessimistic, but I do see it's going to be tricky for clubs that are acting or have gone down the route that we've been for the last 10 years. Going forward, I think it might become more problematic and harder to operate, because now we're not just, the people who want it free and liberated, they're up against people who are trying to protect themselves and their investments now, and I really hope it doesn't go the wrong way. I think that there's going to be some kind of collaborations need to happen. It'd be nice, it would be wonderful, it's needed, it's necessary for us to get the right to grow still. So I'm quite hopeful that your case goes well. I'm actually in court in 2 weeks for a bust that happened in 2019. When I released a magazine called The Quarter Leaf to give access to people who didn't, doctors who weren't involved in the movement. We could give them this copy of this magazine. They could learn quite a lot about what was happening from a patient's perspective and what was happening in the industry. Someone sent an ounce of weed to the magazine to say thanks for such a great magazine. They didn't wrap it up. The post office called the police raided us, and it's taken 4 years to come to court. Obviously, I'm going not guilty, because I don't think I'm guilty, but it's caused a lot of problems for me, for the clubs, just for progress in general,
well,
really.
I mean, it just goes to show the legacy market that's existed here for such a long time. There is this new wave of money coming in, trying to control everything, and we've got this incredible craft industry, which they were talking about in the previous panel as well, where we need to utilise the skill sets of what we have in this country.
I think going forward, a big lesson that needs to be learned about the 2018 legalisation campaign was, and you touched on this earlier, just be true to yourself and to what you're doing, because so many people got in so many ears of patients. This is what you need to say to the camera when they interview you, and it was, I mean, you're a patient. You're getting your cannabis. This is the real situation. You're getting your cannabis from a cannabis social club who is breaking the law to provide that service for you. They're risking their freedom for you. They know they're doing it. It's stressful. It's not easy to do. It's a lot of burden to carry. And sorry, where was I going with that? Yeah, and so then they get these campaign groups whisper in their ears. What you need to tell them is that you buy your cannabis from the street dealers. It's scary, it's bad quality, and you fear for your life. Well, that's not really what was happening. So that's what the public have been told. That's what they think the only way people are getting their cannabis was. If those patients had told the media, we get our cannabis from a cannabis social club, these people need to be legalised because they provide the service I need, and my life has changed around from not being able to get out of bed to being able to go on a 3-mile cannabis march unaided without a walking stick or a wheelchair or anyone even helping me. Like if the cannabis social clubs have provided that for your life, that's what you need to shout about. That's what we need the message to be heard and campaign for. Otherwise, we do end up with the pharmaceutical system that we've got, where GPs still can't prescribe cannabis to patients that really need it.
Maybe we need to be shouting about that again now. Just realising that we've hit the hour. We're going to have one more question and then we're going to break for lunch. So,
you say about cannabis clubs. My thing is finding landlords to have these clubs in. We're asking all over Cornwall. No one wants to listen to us because they're all scared. In Cornwall, how do we get these landlords with premises to say, yeah, you can have a club here. We're ready to go, me and my friend. We just need somewhere to freaking do it. That's all we don't have.
It's literally a case of making allies, finding people like who are on side who've got those spaces. But that is the problem. Is Section 8 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. If you allow your premises to be used for I think it's literally the smoking of drugs, then because they're not that's a legal. There's a legal prescription for that. It's not an illegal drug that's being smoked in here anymore. Yeah, it's obviously it's a way to go and try out if you want, and that's the way we were kind of operating beforehand. I just think the police might turn around and say, well, it was your responsibility to know who was in your establishment. Yeah.
Well, guys, we've hit 12 o'clock. We're going to have to wrap it up now. Free, do you want to just say one last thing and then we'll finish up?
Yeah, become the landlords that's getting the premises and doing it. The restriction I put in is not to sell anything illegally. So I'm not selling it. You can have this product. Give me a donation if you wish. But put it into private trust outside the jurisdiction of private corporation trading as HM Treasury, which people would think is a British government, but it's nothing to do with Britain at all.
There we go. Lovely. Well, I just want to thank our panellists, standing on the shoulders of giants. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Hi, I just want to announce that there's some pitters, some food available at the cafe during lunch. We're going to start the panels again at 1 o'clock. Do please go upstairs to the Hanover room and take a look. We've got some more stalls up there, and there's a vaping zone outside, or you can go and have a vape with a volcano just by the front window. Thanks very much, and see you again at 1 o'clock.